Hey everybody, what's going on? This is Wyatt Towne, and today I'm going to be doing my final project in lab for CIS 255 client-side web development. And what I'm actually going to be talking about today is something pretty interesting. It's something I found out about not too long ago. It's something called CSS animations and keyframes. And so essentially what this is, and I'm actually going to give you an example here. I'm going to pull up Notepad real quick. So say we had in like a web page document, say we had some, some kind of like text characters. Let's just say we had I don't know, like an R, right? Let's say we made this font color red for this R. Well, what if we wanted to change the font color with responsive web design to green? Well, normally, what you could do is you could assign two different class values, right? Well, yeah, class values, I guess. And each one of those class values might have a different font color property, right? And then you would remove a class and then add a class and change the color. But see, the problem with that is then the color is going to change instantaneously. It's going to make that sharp transition, and it's not going to look very good. So basically, what CSS animations and keyframes allow you to do is to create a gradual transition, something that looks more smooth, a lot more elegant. And how this is done is, and this isn't the exact syntax, but I'll be getting into that a little bit later in the video. But essentially what you do is you declare an animation and you give it a specified period of time that this animation is going to take place over. So let's just say we declare an animation for 5 seconds. Um, then what's going to happen is, here's the animation. Now, what the keyframes are is they essentially define the beginning and end states and all of those states in between of that animation. So what do I mean by that? So when we define keyframes, we actually use percent values. So like 0% would be the very beginning of the animation, when you are 0% through the animation loop. So when this animation just starts, when it begins, this is going to be the state of the element that you're creating the animation for, essentially. So let's say at the beginning, it's red, right? The element's red. Well, we can define a 10% keyframe state and say now we want the element to be, let's see, 90% red and maybe 10% green. And you could keep going and do 20%. You could say now we want it to be 80% red and 20% green. And you would keep doing this until you finally reached 100%, and which, when ideally, you would probably want the element to be completely green, some shade of green anyways. Um, and so basically this is going to allow for a smooth transition instead of making that sharp jump when you like remove and add a class. And yeah, this will make a little bit more sense later in the video. So for now, I'm going to move on, and I'm going to get started here. So you may have noticed right now that I'm working in the Notepad++ IDE. And for those of you that don't have it installed, we're going to go ahead and do that real quick. So I'm going to go ahead and open a web browser here. I'm going to bring over Google Chrome. And then in the Google Chrome search box, go ahead and type in Notepad++. Google search engine should bring this up for us. Go ahead and click on the download link here, and we're actually going to be installing this first one here, the one that has the comment appended. Take this one if you have no idea which one you should take. Just for simplicity's sake, we are going to use this one. So go ahead and click on that. Down here in the, I'm going to move this guy out of the way. Down here in the install tab, this should pop up. Just click open when done. And then when the prompt comes up, go ahead and click run. And then go ahead and select English for your language here. So this is gonna, oh, go ahead and get rid of this here. Oh no, I'm gonna allow this process to continue. So this is gonna bring up the Notepad++ installation wizard, and I'm actually going to, just for the scope of this video, since I'm on kind of a time constraint here, I'm gonna go ahead and skip this part. There are more specifications in my lab notes, but for the most part, the prompts that the installation wizard will give you are very, very straightforward, and it should only take about 5 minutes. So if you don't have Notepad++ installed yet, go ahead and pause the video and then resume when you're done. But for those of you that do, we're going to go ahead and cancel out of here, and we're going to return back to the IDE, and we are going to get started. So the first thing that we're going to want to do actually is we're going to want to make two files, one called textlight with the .html extension, and then textlight with the CSS extension. And obviously the CSS is going to hold our cascading style sheet, and the HTML is going to hold, well, our HTML. And so once you have those created, originally what I was going to do is I was going to code along with you guys, and I was going to kind of show you what to do, but 20 minutes really isn't as long as you think it is. So I'm going to have to revamp this, the way I do this a little bit, and I'm just going to kind of walk you through, because I already read everything out beforehand, and so I'm just going to kind of walk you through what everything is. And if you're following along and coding at the same time, I mean, you can just, I'll always have the window open like this. You can just pause the video, type it in, and then resume. But for now, though, I'm going to move along here. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to start creating the outline for our HTML document. So we're going to define our doc type, which is going to be HTML, and then we're going to create the HTML tags here. Then we're going to wrap our body tags here and our head tags in. So then once you have those done, the next thing we're going to do is we're actually going to create a reference to our cascading style sheet here. So we're going to do that by creating a link tag up in the head section of our HTML document, and we're going to assign the href attribute to a value of textlight.css, which is just the name of our cascading style sheet, and then we're just going to use the rel attribute to basically define what kind of document it's going to be looking at, and of course it's going to be a style sheet. Real quick, the reason I'm able to make this direct reference like this is because if I go to the folder that this is stored in, back up here, you'll notice these are on the same folder level or directory level. So I don't have to like define an entire path. I can just make a direct reference right here to the file. But anyways, after we have that done, we now have a reference to our cascading style sheet. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to come down into the body section, and we are going to create an unordered list. And if I can actually drag this guy over, this is what we're going to be making essentially by the end of this lab here. It's a nice little animation here with kind of like a transitioning gradient, kind of moves from left to right, and I'll explain all of this later, but we're going to be holding these text characters in that unordered list you just saw. So we're going to put each one in a separate list item. Go ahead and minimize this real quick. And so go ahead and create your unordered list here, and then we're going to assign it a class value of tlight. Now, to be totally honest, we don't really need to do this, because if you notice, this is the only element in our body section. The only reason I'm doing this is for convention's sake, because, I mean, normally if you were creating an actual web page for a real website, chances are you would have, I mean, multiple other elements, if not other unordered list elements. So just for convention's sake, I am going to add this in here, and if you're following along, I would do the same. And then we are going to create 6 list items here. One for C, then I, S, 255. And that is going to hold each of the individual text characters. If you notice here, I have an inline style here. The reason I'm doing this is if I pull this guy back up again, drag this guy over, notice that there's a space right here in between the S and the 2. I just did that so it wasn't bunched together, so these kind of be 2 separate words or numbers, or whatever you want to reference them as. So I just created that inline style there to essentially add space in between the S and the 2. That's the only reason that's there. You don't have to do that, but if you want to follow along, again, go ahead and copy that down there. Once you have that, that's it right now for our HTML. So we're going to go ahead and go over to the CSS file, and this is where things start getting fun. So I'm actually going to leave this guy up here just so you guys can kind of see what's going on. Might be easier to follow along. So you notice here first we are editing the body element, which is basically just a window that you're looking at, the viewport here of the web page. And we're going to change the background color to, this is just a hex value basically for a dark gray color. You can look into those, you can Google that if you want, there's tons out there. It's really hard, you can't really memorize all of them, but just know that this is for a dark gray tone like we see here. And the reason I made it dark gray is because, number one, it kind of makes it easier to see the colors instead of a white background, and it's just kind of a, I don't know, it's like a smooth, mellow, relaxing background to look at, so that's why I did that. So next, if you notice here, ul.tlight. So essentially what this is saying, for any unordered list that has a class value of tlight, which is what we made in our HTML file about a minute ago, make the following modifications to the style properties. So the first modification we're making is we're going to modify the position property of this unordered list to be absolute to its parent, which in this case is body, because it's not like it's wrapped in a div tag or anything, it's just this in the body. So the parent is the body. So what this right here is saying, top 45%, which means from the top edge of the parent, which is just the top of the window here, because it's the body, move this 45% from the top. So that's what's going on here. It's moving 45% from the top, 38% from the left, and this display flex property here. Again, you can Google this. I don't have time to go into this right now, but essentially there's this there's a thing called the flex box in a web page document. And basically what it does, it kind of defines how these characters will take up space in the document. Because you know how normally for like a list you would have like C would take up a line, then I would be below that, would take up a line, S would be placed below that, it would take up a line, and so on and so forth. But what this display flex is doing is it's displaying it horizontally, so it's kind of like maximizing the space efficiency, more or less. And again, the W3 Schools has documentation on that and stuff, so I would definitely go check that out. I just, for the scope of this video, I don't have time to explain that in detail right now. So then we move on down here. What this is right here is saying ul.tlight. So for any unordered list that has the class value of tlight, for all of its list item children, right? Because we had 6 list items in there. Make the following modifications. So here, what list style none basically means is we're just getting rid of the bullet points because we obviously don't want those in there for this. Font family, that's pretty straightforward. Just Arial. You can really make that whatever you want. Font size, I made it 100 pixels. Again, that can be any arbitrary number. Letter spacing, 15 pixels. So in between each one of these letters here, 15 pixels. Notice here, though, that this space is a little bit larger. Remember, we put that inline style in the HTML document, so it's kind of overriding this. We did that margin right for the S, if you remember. So that's why there's like a 40 pixel gap here and 15 everywhere else. And then here, I'm going to come back to this later, but this is just setting the initial RGB value for the color of the text. And again, I'll come back to that in a little bit. Text shadow none, just no shadow for any of the text characters here. That's pretty obvious. And then here's where we are actually declaring the animation. So what this right here is saying basically, animation. This is a style property. What this is saying is we want this animation to last for 5 seconds, right? 5 seconds. Then the infinite value here, what this is doing is it's saying this animation is going to continue looping forever. It's never going to stop. And then the linear value here, what this means is no matter how many times it loops, this animation is always going to happen at the same exact speed. It's not going to go slower, it's not going to go faster, it's not going to oscillate speed, it's going to go the same speed. That's just for, I mean, there's different value for that. Again, if you go to the W3 Schools, you can look up there. There's a whole list of them on there, so you can check that out. But for now, I'm going to go ahead and move on. So this is where things start to get cool but confusing. We move into the keyframes now. So you remember earlier how I said that keyframes were basically different, they define different states of the animation? Well, if you see here, I have those percent values like I showed you before at the beginning of the video. And again, basically what this is saying is at 0%, or at 0% of your way through the animation, this is going to be the state of the element style. 5% this, 10% this, 15% this, and so on and so forth until you get down, where am I at here? To 100%, here we go. And so what I'm doing essentially here, well, first you have to declare so the document knows that you're moving into keyframes now. So just use these keywords here when you're defining keyframe states. Then obviously put the curly braces to open and close. But basically, at 0%, the text is going to be this RGB value. 5%, the text is now going to be this RGB value for its color. 10%, this RGB value. And I'm basically just moving through the color wheel. If you actually go to, if I go ahead and drag this guy over here, go to Google, and then just type in color picker. Google actually has a really cool tool where if you just kind of scroll ever so slowly here, you can see that it's giving you the hex value and the RGB value for all the different colors in the color wheel. So basically what I did is I just scrolled really slowly, and I just kept copying and pasting this RGB value into my CSS document. So it would make this slow transition. And I only use like probably about 1/4 of the color wheel here. And I mean, you can really make it do whatever you want because you can see it modifies the values for you. So it's a really cool tool to use if you're doing something like this. I'm gonna go ahead and minimize out of this. That's kind of how I got these RGB values here. And it was pretty simple to do actually with that tool. So I'm really glad Google had that at the ready for developers to use like that. So basically that's what's going on here. Now something I want to show you real quick. Notice here, this RGB value is the same as the initial value I made the color appear. Now the reason I'm doing that is because when you get to the end, the final state, the 100% state of the keyframe, what would happen normally is this is going to snap back to this color. And it would still do it like a subtle movement, but with that drastic change, I mean, because you're, if I shouldn't have brought that guy down. I should have kept him up. So when this gets to the end, what would happen is it would immediately snap back here, and that's not what we want. We don't want it to go directly from red back to, I think I started on blue. I think that's where I have it starting. But that's why we set the initial color here to the same as the ending color. So it kind of makes that smooth transition back into the beginning keyframe here. Kind of holds it out for a little bit longer, and that's why we're doing that. I'm gonna move down here now. So this part's even a little bit more confusing. So what we're looking at right now, these are called selectors. So if you notice on the animation here, the color is kind of pushing. It's making like a left to right motion. If you notice that, it's starting at the C and it's kind of moving right. It's almost like someone's pushing it this way. It's almost kind of like it's flowing across the letters from left to right. So you might be wondering, you know, if the keyframes are happening the way they are, you know, they're all changing at the same time. Then how come the letters aren't all transitioning at the same point in time? Well, how we accomplish that is we use what's called selectors. So here I have ul.tlight, right? So any unordered list with the class value of tlight, select the nth child. In this case, we're passing it a parameter value of 1. So this is selecting the first child of the unordered list, which in this case is our C here. And it's saying delay the animation when the web page loads, when the web page renders, delay the animation for 0.2 seconds. For the second child, delay for 0.4 seconds. Third child, delay for 0.6. Fourth child, 0.8, 1, 1.2, and so on and so forth. And so basically, if that's how we're accomplishing this here, because this one's firing off first when the web page first renders. This one's firing off first, then this one's firing off, then this one's firing off, then this one, then this one, then this one, and then it starts over again. This one fires off first again, second, third, and so on and so forth. But that's kind of how we're getting that effect there. It's pretty simple once you kind of understand what these selectors are actually doing. And to be honest, that's about it. That's how we accomplish this animation. That's how we render this on the web page. If you notice here, I have a couple child selectors commented out here, about 4 or 5 of them. There was actually one I was working on earlier. I just got this idea from somebody off of YouTube. Actually, I'll go ahead and bring it up here. TubeLight.html. So this is something else you can do. It gives off more of like a flashy animation. I didn't really do this because I thought the other way was more practical. I think on an actual web page, you know, this might kind of annoy the user or the viewer. So it's cool in its own way, but this right here might be a little bit more practical than something like that, just because it's easier to look at. When you think about it from the perspective of like a visitor, a viewer of a website or a web page. But essentially, yeah, that's basically it. That is how we accomplish this animation here. And honestly, guys, there's so much you can do with this. I mean, I just essentially scratched the surface of keyframes and animations. I mean, there's so much you can do. Like I saw somebody that had like a box up in the top of the web page when the page rendered, and it would drop down to the bottom if you like clicked a button, and then there was like I don't know, it would give off different effects when it hit the floor basically of the web page, and there's just like this limitless library of animations you can use and you can find. You just got to go out there and look for them, and normally that will sprout ideas for yourself. That's how I basically came up with this. I saw someone on YouTube that had this video called TubeLight that kind of gave me this idea, and from that I kind of crafted it into my own little thing, and that's how I came up with this. So I guess basically what I'm trying to say is just look around. There's so much stuff out there. Even if you're just looking and reading through W3 Schools documentation or Stack Overflow documentation, it's just, I don't know, it's just a limitless library of ideas and innovation. So yeah, that's about it. thank you guys for watching. I had a lot of fun making this. I had a lot of fun doing this for class, and I guess I'll see you in class.